They say Egypt buried their dead with gold, with prayers and with purpose. But what if some tombs were never built to honor the dead, but to contain something that should have never been found? Across the Nile, beneath collapsed temples and sealed shafts, lie resting places untouched not by time, but by fear. A sarcophagus filled with salt, a burial chamber that sings when opened, a tomb with no name, no face, no time. These are not just graves, they are warnings. And in some cases, cages. You're watching mysteries never discovered. And tonight, we ask, were Egypt's greatest secrets buried for eternity? Or were they buried for our protection? The Giza Plateau has long been the crown jewel of ancient Egypt, an icon to archaeologists, tourists, and conspiracy theorists alike. While most attention gravitates toward the towering pyramids, a quieter anomaly has remained largely overlooked: the Sphinx. In 1993, a team led by Dr. Thomas Dobecki and John Anthony West conducted ground-penetrating radar scans around the base of the Sphinx. The data revealed a rectangular cavity beneath the right forepaw, with dimensions unlike any known tomb or chamber in Egyptian architecture. The anomaly was not aligned with natural fissures, nor did it resemble a collapse. It was geometrically clean, acoustically distinct, and completely undocumented in any official Egyptian record. The chamber's material density contrasted with the surrounding bedrock, suggesting deliberate construction using different or possibly non-native materials. This wasn't erosion, it was engineering. And that raised questions far beyond archaeology. Shortly after the findings were announced in closed academic circles, the Egyptian Antiquities Authority suspended all excavation licenses in the area. The team's equipment was impounded, their permits revoked. No public reason was given. Then came the Americans. Delegates from NASA and an unnamed military technical unit arrived in Giza under diplomatic cover. They reviewed the radar logs, removed the core hardware, and conducted their own classified scans. Within days, Dr. Dobecki stepped down from the project. No formal statement was released. A junior engineer on the team later claimed that the anomaly exhibited unusual electromagnetic behavior resonance patterns inconsistent with any known void. He suggested that the chamber might not have been a burial site, but a containment zone for a device or structure of unknown origin. Soon after, every trace of the project disappeared from university servers. Backups failed, access logs were wiped. In 2013, a leaked internal briefing from Lockheed Martin made cryptic reference to Vault 1I, a high-security project associated with deep Earth acoustic anomalies and electromagnetic nodes in North Africa. The internal map attached to the document matched coordinates surrounding the Sphinx. The project symbol bore the Eye of Horus. The memo described a subsurface cavity with nonlinear acoustic feedback and anomalous heat retention traits consistent with what the 1993 radar scans had identified. Attempts to revisit the site were systematically blocked by new legislation, framing the Sphinx as a non-permissible excavation zone. Drone access was restricted. GPS data near the Sphinx became erratic on civilian systems, and satellite imagery from major providers began to blur or distort the area. Some suggested this was routine mapping error. Others knew better. Because when international security protocols align to erase a simple archaeological anomaly from public view, it's no longer about tombs or pharaohs. It's about control, and what might be waiting beneath the sand, quiet, sealed, and never meant to be found. Military interest in the Giza Plateau didn't begin in 1993. Declassified mission logs from as early as 1984 describe infrared surveillance flights over the area, marked with unexplained subsurface heat signatures. A 1985 non-classified U.S. military field report vaguely references thermal irregularities near the southeastern base of the monument designated Sphinx. Though the report avoids specifics, the accompanying grid coordinates match almost exactly with the anomaly later confirmed by Debicki's team. Analysis of infrared contrast levels suggests the presence of a structure beneath the limestone bed that retained heat independent of surface conditions. Civilian geologists reviewing this data quietly noted that natural stone cannot account for the shape or thermal retention patterns captured in the imagery. In 1989, an internal memorandum from the Defense Intelligence Agency cited a magnetically responsive void in proximity to high tourism archaeological zones. The phrase would appear benign until you notice it was followed by a redacted appendix and a top-tier confidentiality lock. The existence of the chamber, it seemed, had been known long before the public ever heard of it. By 2002, commercial satellite images from QuickBird and Iconos revealed curious interference patterns in the Giza region. Though dismissed as compression artifacts, experts in signal analysis noted rhythmic distortions concentrated at the foot of the Sphinx. In that same year, a group of MIT graduate students attempted to generate a full 3D topographic reconstruction of the Giza complex using publicly available elevation data. Their software crashed repeatedly when processing the terrain beneath the Sphinx's right paw. After weeks of debugging, they discovered that data packets for those coordinates returned conflicting elevation values, sometimes with negative terrain depths, impossible for an above-ground monument. The project was quietly abandoned, and all records of the attempt vanished from MIT's servers within a year. When contacted years later, team members either declined to comment or claimed no recollection of the issue. Around that time, GPS data in the area began to experience unexplained drift. Devices would show sudden altitude shifts of up to 20 meters, rendering mapping software unreliable within a 500-meter radius of the Sphinx. Between 2015 and 2020, multiple foreign archaeological missions to Egypt focused heavily on nearby sites like Saqqara, Dashur, and the Valley of the Kings, but not Giza. Public excavation at the Sphinx had halted completely. One Japanese geophysicist, Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, applied for permission to perform high-resolution seismic imaging around the monument. His application was denied without explanation. He later revealed during a private symposium that he received a direct communication unsigned and untraceable advising him to suspend all activity related to deep penetration studies in Zone 9. Zone 9 was a code name previously linked to Giza's restricted excavation zones. In 2019, a 47-second video clip surfaced briefly on an encrypted forum. It showed a team of 4 individuals in unmarked uniforms lowering a cylindrical device into a drilled shaft at the exact radar-indicated location beneath the Sphinx. The video file name, V1 EG Minerva 0411. Its metadata showed a single timestamp and no origin source. Within 48 hours, the clip was removed, and reposts were scrubbed using takedown protocols normally reserved for defense leaks. No government claimed ownership. No archaeological authority issued a response. But a copy still circulates, shared quietly between researchers who understand what was found and what must not be said aloud. He was the most radical pharaoh Egypt had ever known, Akhenaten, the heretic king who abolished the old gods and replaced them with a single divine force. Aten, the sun disk. He dismantled priestly power, moved the capital, and rewrote Egypt's theology. And then, he vanished. His name was erased from walls, his statues destroyed, and his tomb never found. While the Valley of the Kings holds the remains of many rulers, Akhenaten's true burial site remains unconfirmed. Tomb KV55 was once proposed to be his. But forensic inconsistencies, like the estimated age of the skeleton and unusual cranial dimensions, cast doubt. For a figure of such historical weight, this absence is not an oversight. It's a void carved with surgical precision. And the closer researchers get to its edges, the more resistance they encounter from academia, from bureaucracy, and from invisible hands guiding the narrative. In the early 2000s, satellite imaging sponsored by the European Space Agency identified subsurface anomalies along the cliffs east of Amarna, the city Akhenaten, built from scratch and then abandoned. The anomalies, resembling chambers with right-angled geometry, were consistent with burial architecture from the Amarna period. Initial excavation requests were filed by two independent teams from Germany and Canada. Both were denied access within the same month. Shortly after, the satellite maps of the area were quietly updated, and the anomalies disappeared from public view. When questioned, officials claimed the initial data was corrupted. However, archived screenshots from amateur cartographers preserve the original overlays, and they still circulate within underground archaeological forums. These maps show a rectangular chamber embedded into the cliff wall, positioned along a golden ratio vector tied directly to Amarna's temple axis. According to ancient architectural logic, this would be a mathematically sacred location, an ideal place to bury a ruler who sought to defy death itself by aligning with cosmic order. What's more disturbing is what happened to those who pushed further. In 2007, a private archaeology group known as Horus Line Expeditions conducted an unsanctioned scan of the area using drone-based LiDAR. Their findings were never formally published, but an encrypted document uploaded anonymously in 2011 revealed portions of their internal report. The team discovered a sequence of interconnected voids forming a serpentine path beneath the Amarna cliffs, culminating in a sealed cubic chamber with a metallic resonance signature. Within months of the leak, the expedition's website was taken offline, its legal entity dissolved, and its founder, Dr. Eric Stensgaard, vanished from the academic circuit. Attempts to contact surviving members were unsuccessful. One email response read simply, "Let the dead have their secrets." There is no grave for Akhenaten, no remains conclusively linked to him, and no consensus on where he rests. And yet, the evidence points to something hidden, protected, and perhaps deliberately untraceable. The question is no longer whether the tomb exists. It's why someone continues to make sure we never find it. And what truths are buried with him that modern history cannot afford to resurrect? In 2010, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, under Zahi Hawass, announced the results of a groundbreaking DNA study. The goal was to establish familial connections among royal mummies from the 18th dynasty. According to the official findings, the male skeleton in tomb KV-45 was most likely Akhenaten. Yet the published genetic profile raised immediate red flags among bioarchaeologists. The KV-45 mummy's age at death was estimated between 18 and 25. Akhenaten would have been in his 40s. The cranial structure was elongated, with an unusual parietal bulge and disproportionately narrow facial features. Skeptics were quick to point out that these were physical anomalies, not consistent with any typical Egyptian male remains from that period. Despite this, the team doubled down on the identification. The question wasn't about confidence, it was about control. Because the conclusion would effectively close the file on Akhenaten, no further search needed, no questions asked, but contradictions mounted. Internal sources within the genetics team later disclosed that mitochondrial DNA segments from KV-45 did not align neatly with the profile of Queen Tiye, Akhenaten's confirmed mother. The data was edited for clarity, according to one analyst. Another researcher, who requested anonymity, claimed that more than half the raw sequencing data was missing from the published report. Requests for independent verification were denied. The stored sample was reportedly compromised shortly after publication. When a coalition of international laboratories offered to fund a blind retest, their application was declined. The reason? Security and heritage concerns. In effect, Egypt had labeled the tomb's narrative a national secret. If the body was misidentified, or worse, misrepresented, it wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And like most decisions in this story, it served to divert attention, not resolve questions. Then came the Akhenaten genome theory, proposed by a group of rogue geneticists in 2014. The theory argued that the KV-55 skeleton exhibited markers inconsistent with normal human lineages. Specifically, mitochondrial anomalies were observed in the hypervariable regions areas, responsible for regulating cellular energy and neurological development. These mutations were not only rare, but undocumented in any modern population database. Some argued the findings were evidence of ancient genetic disease. Others, more cautiously, suggested the possibility of an intentionally modified genome. The theory gained traction when several genetic markers found in KV-55 were cross-referenced with anomalies in the skeleton from tomb KV believed to be Akhenaten's wife, Queen Nefertiti. The overlaps were statistically improbable, bordering on engineered. The implications were staggering. If true, it suggested either a now extinct bloodline or an ancient attempt at genetic manipulation, possibly ritualistic, possibly technological, and certainly concealed. By 2017, discussions around Akhenaten's DNA had all but disappeared from mainstream academic circles. Conferences that once held sessions on the Amarna lineage quietly removed them from agendas. Published papers were withdrawn or retracted without explanation. Researchers who previously spoke openly about the inconsistencies now declined interviews. A silent freeze had settled over the topic. As for KV-55, the mummy remains on display in Cairo, but behind glass with no updated documentation. No new tests have been authorized, and the tomb itself has become less a site of study than a symbol of closure, an official conclusion that cannot be challenged, even when the facts scream otherwise. Akhenaten's real tomb, if it exists, is still out there. But what's buried with it may not just rewrite Egyptian history. It might tear a hole in everything we think we know about humanity's past. In July 2018, construction workers in Alexandria uncovered a massive black granite sarcophagus buried 5 meters underground. At over 2 meters long and weighing nearly 30 tons, it was one of the largest ever found in Egypt, sealed and untouched since antiquity. From the start, the discovery defied expectations. The sarcophagus bore no inscriptions, no religious iconography, and no indication of ownership. Experts from Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities described it as unusual in both scale and silence. Within days, the site was cordoned off and placed under tight security. A small team of archaeologists and government observers were allowed to witness the opening. What they found inside stunned even seasoned researchers. 3 skeletons submerged in reddish-brown fluid, later identified as a mix of sewage water and dissolved organic material. The remains were disarticulated and jumbled, with no sign of proper mummification or funerary preparation. For a coffin of such grandeur, the contents made no sense. And the more authorities tried to explain it, the less convincing it sounded. Official reports stated the bodies were likely those of soldiers, hastily buried during the Ptolemaic period. The acidic fluid was said to be the result of groundwater contamination. But several forensic inconsistencies cast doubt. First, bone analysis showed signs of prolonged exposure to high ambient radiation, not typical of urban burial sites. Second, dental morphology in 2 of the skulls suggested traits uncommon among ancient Egyptians, including mandibular compression and irregular bicuspid orientation. Third, carbon dating from one sample yielded an anomalous reading, nearly 1,200 years older than the others. Despite these anomalies, no further DNA tests were authorized. Instead, officials declared the matter closed. Media coverage shifted to a bizarre internet campaign demanding that people drink the mummy juice, a viral distraction that quickly derailed any serious conversation about the find. Within a month, the sarcophagus was relocated. The skeletons dispersed to storage facilities, and the site was filled and repaved. No peer-reviewed publication has ever documented the full excavation log. What little information escaped into the public came from a freelance geneticist who claimed to have briefly handled tissue samples recovered from the site. In a now-deleted blog post, she described mitochondrial degradation patterns, inconsistent with human decomposition under normal atmospheric conditions. One sample reportedly yielded partial gene sequences with polymorphic markers untraceable to any known ethnic lineage. Within days of posting her findings, her account was taken offline, and her academic affiliation was retracted by the institution listed in her bio. Screenshots of the post survive, shared in private Discord servers and niche archival groups. In one excerpt, she wrote, "I don't know what this is, but it isn't just decay. It looks like bioediting, ancient, crude, but not random." A few weeks later, rumors began to spread about an internal memo circulated by Egypt's Department of Antiquities warning labs against conducting unsanctioned analysis on the black sarcophagus samples. The memo cited concerns about cross-contamination and international misinterpretation, a phrase that raises more questions than it answers. The samples, if they still exist, are now off limits. In early 2019, a classified circular distributed among forensic anthropology departments across Europe quietly advised caution when analyzing human remains retrieved from ancient coastal burial sites, especially those displaying signs of calcified hematologic saturation. Though the memo made no direct reference to Egypt, two researchers in Berlin independently noted its phrasing matched abnormalities observed in the skeletal remains from the black sarcophagus. One of them, Dr. Lena Kroger, had been part of an international cataloging program for anomalous osteological findings. According to her notice later leaked by a student assistant, two of the three skulls exhibited trace isotopes associated with marine exposure, yet were buried 5 kilometers inland. Moreover, the cranial sutures had fused in patterns typically found in high-altitude populations, a geographic mismatch that made no biological sense. When Kroger submitted her findings to an interdisciplinary journal, the paper was immediately rejected, not for scientific inaccuracy, but due to lack of contextual consistency. She later stated in a private message, "The bones don't fit the coffin, and the coffin doesn't fit the story. That usually means someone changed the story." By mid-2020, rumors began to circulate about a joint task force formed between UNESCO and a private biosecurity firm operating under NATO contracts. Their mandate? To investigate and secure biogenetic irregularities in artifact-recovered organic samples. Although publicly denied, several archaeological labs reported surprise inspections that resulted in confiscation of biological samples, often with no formal paperwork or chain of custody. At least 3 labs in Spain, Poland, and Turkey had black sarcophagus-related materials quietly removed. In each case, the researchers involved signed non-disclosure agreements under threat of academic sanctions. When asked by journalists, the institutions declined to comment. Simultaneously, a surge in data access restrictions emerged across key scientific repositories. Mitochondrial databases from the early 2010s were quietly rolled back to earlier versions. Sequence archives that once held open access markers now returned 404 errors or required credentialed clearance. One archivist referred to it as a quiet purge. Nothing overt, but undeniably systematic. What makes this case more troubling is its resonance with similar findings outside Egypt. In 2016, skeletal remains recovered from a coastal cave system in the Canary Islands exhibited the same unclassified bicuspid mutations found in 2 of the black sarcophagus skulls. The discovery was dismissed as coincidental. But in 2021, another case emerged in western Peru. A sealed basalt tomb containing partial remains with genetic similarities to both the Alexandrian find and the Canary sample. These distant, disconnected discoveries share no cultural or historical continuity, yet display identical traits in mitochondrial regions thought to mutate slowly across millennia. Such convergence suggests either a shared unknown lineage or deliberate manipulation. One working theory posits that these individuals represent a buried stratum of human history, genetically distinct and suppressed by both time and narrative. Another proposes something more radical, a bio-ritualistic caste, engineered or selected, tasked with preserving something knowledge, bloodlines, or even memory beneath symbolic monuments. If that's the case, the black sarcophagus may not have been a coffin at all, but a container, a preservation unit, and its unmarked surface, rather than a void of meaning, might signal secrecy by design. Whatever was buried there, someone made sure we couldn't explain it. Not with science, not with story, not yet. In 1997, a joint expedition by French and Egyptian archaeologists uncovered a subterranean chamber near the Saqqara necropolis. Located at what was then logged as 29.87 or 3 diggin 31-165 DGE, the chamber contained a single limestone sarcophagus carved without inscriptions, resting atop a hexagonal platform of black basalt. Despite its unassuming design, the chamber was notable for one feature. It had no apparent entry point, no tunnel, no shaft, no staircase. The walls were seamless, cut from bedrock with a precision reminiscent of mechanical boring. LiDAR mapping suggested the room had been formed in one motion, as if hollowed out using a technology lost to time. The anomaly was logged and photographed, but within a week, access to the site was restricted. A new concrete shell was poured over the entrance, and the GPS location was redacted in updated expedition maps. Most dismissed it as standard procedure, until one of the expedition's engineers went missing on his flight home. His name was Stephen Moreau. His boarding record existed, his plane landed, but he was never seen again. A year later, a team from the University of Warsaw attempted to relocate the chamber using original coordinates. What they found was sand. No markers, no trace of the basalt platform. When they consulted satellite imagery from the original dig week, the metadata showed that tiles covering the coordinates had been overwritten with older images, dated months before the expedition even began. Someone had replaced real-time satellite data with anachronistic placeholders, and yet discrepancies remained. An independent analyst reviewing the thermal bands from 1997 noticed a residual heat signature at the Site 1 consistent with a subterranean void, even though the surface was now undisturbed. He submitted a request to the Polish Ministry of Culture to reopen the dig. The request was denied without comment. Shortly after, his lab was audited for foreign data irregularities, and his research credentials were suspended. His colleagues received emails warning them to avoid exotic mapping zones. The term did not exist in any known cartographic classification. Meanwhile, the original photos of the chamber began to vanish. Archives at CNRS, the French National Center for Scientific Research, reported integrity issues with the expedition's image files. Backup drives failed to load. FTP directories returned empty. Even the analog copies, stored in a private archive in Marseille, were reportedly damaged during a spontaneous electrical fire in 2002. A blurry scan of one surviving image, preserved on a non-indexed server, shows what appears to be a star-shaped engraving etched into the ceiling above the sarcophagus. The symbol does not match any known Egyptian glyph or motif. Some believe it resembles the pentaradial symmetry found in deep-sea organisms. Others argue it's simply an error of film degradation. Either way, the image is the only piece of visual evidence that the tomb ever existed. And even that is disappearing. Researchers who downloaded the scan report checksum errors on playback. In 2022, a student at the University of Lyon attempted to 3D reconstruct the room from secondhand descriptions. The project was flagged by institutional IT security as containing insecure geometry. The term, again, does not exist in any official database. But those who've seen the output say the model wouldn't render walls, only the floor, the ceiling, and the box in the center. By 2005, the location that once held the sarcophagus chamber was officially designated as part of a non-essential agricultural zone by Egypt's Central Agency for Public Mobilization. No mention of prior excavation appeared in state records. Google Earth, which had launched its satellite platform that same year, included the region in early overlays, but the historical timeline view for those coordinates returned a blank. Not an older image, just absence. The layers jumped from 1996 to 2001, bypassing the window during which the chamber had been exposed. Data engineers working on open-source geospatial tools began to notice checksum mismatches when downloading public terrain tiles from the area. Several reported that rendering engines crashed when trying to parse the landscape elevation model near the original coordinates. In 2008, a French cybersecurity group released a report titled Geographic Anomalies in Public Satellite Archives, citing the Saqqara chamber site as one of 3 known active suppression zones worldwide, alongside a mountain pass in Kazakhstan and an underwater trench off the Azores. The term they used was silent deletion, not erasing evidence, but falsifying its timeline to suggest it never happened. The people who had been on site in 1997 began distancing themselves from the story. Dr. Delphine Marceau, one of the lead geologists on the expedition, later claimed she remembered no such chamber and cited fatigue and heat stress as reasons for collective confusion. Her colleague, Dr. Khalid Badar, stated in a 2010 interview that the platform had been a natural shelf despite having previously signed an affidavit describing it as mechanically planed and anomalously leveled. When pressed about the contradiction, Badr terminated the interview. The lone exception was an anonymous technician, codenamed Lotus Trace, who published a document dump on a darknet academic archive in 2016. Among the files was a schematic reconstruction of the chamber's dimensions, including ceiling height, volume displacement, and floor resonance frequency. The numbers suggested the chamber had been acoustically tuned, a phenomenon known in religious architecture, but never before encountered in a tomb. One diagram highlighted that the sarcophagus had not rested directly on the basalt, but on 6 copper rings embedded flush with the platform positioned like contact points. Perhaps most chilling was a final document in the archive labeled Q Inversion. It was a single-page PDF, bearing no institutional watermark, containing only a graph, no text, no author. The graph showed a waveform loop with a time-stamped x-axis and amplitude spikes repeating every 2.16 hours. When analyzed by audio engineers, the pattern appeared to be a self-generating signal 1 that resonated within its own feedback and reinforced itself over time. Several speculated it could be a model of acoustic storage, a tone designed to persist, possibly even encode data. If such a system were active inside the chamber, the question arose: was the sarcophagus ever meant to hold a body, or was it built to house something else entirely? Something designed to last? If the waveform was real, it may not just be evidence of lost technology. It may be why the chamber was hidden. Not because of what was in it, but because it might still be functioning, still transmitting. And if that's true, then somewhere beneath the sand of Saqqara, a signal is still playing, unheard, unanswered, and erased from the map. South of the well-documented red and bent pyramids of Dashur lies an unlabeled mound of stone, roughly 72 meters wide at the base, rising just under 40 meters in height. At first glance, it resembles a collapsed satellite pyramid, or perhaps the remnants of an unfinished structure. But high-resolution topographic surveys tell a different story. Beneath its outer shell lies a geometric core-8 stepped tiers arranged in a precision octagon, capped with an unusually smooth limestone sheath. The most curious feature: there is no known entrance, no causeway, no shaft, no inscriptions. Ground-penetrating radar, conducted by a Japanese survey team in 2006, returned clear signals of internal voids, including one central vertical shaft running the full height of the pyramid. But no access point could be found from the exterior. The pyramid appears to have been sealed at the moment of construction, or perhaps designed that way from the start. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities initially denied the radar findings. But when confronted with third-party scans, they reclassified the structure as a geological anomaly. Yet archived aerial photographs from the 1960s show the mound intact, with small encampments surrounding it, possibly military. A declassified memo from a 1968 Soviet satellite reconnaissance mission listed the site as Delta Z9 and flagged it as non-conforming architecture. The phrase was typically reserved for installations built using non-standard materials or with untraceable construction methods. In one translated footnote, Soviet analysts noted an unusual magnetic field distortion within the mound, strong enough to affect analog compass readings. Their recommendation was to avoid any ground-based intervention until further study by high-orbit instruments could be completed. No follow-up report has ever been located. When researchers from the University of Cairo proposed a seismic resonance test on the site in 2008, their request was denied. 1 week later, the lead author's institutional webpage was deleted, along with all records of the proposal. Thermal imaging during a 2014 drone survey conducted by a Spanish film crew revealed strange temperature variances across the pyramid's surface. During the early hours of the morning, the eastern face registered 4 degs higher than surrounding stone, a discrepancy far beyond typical solar retention. The variance repeated nightly for 6 consecutive days, then abruptly stopped. Subsequent flights failed to replicate the anomaly. Infrared footage from the initial survey was uploaded to a public server, but was taken down within hours. When asked, the filmmakers stated they had no comment and did not retain backups. Despite the lack of official interest, whispers within the archaeological fringe community began to circulate. One theory suggested the structure served as a vault, not for the dead, but for a device possibly sonic in nature. Another posited that the pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a tuning chamber part of a broader energy network spread across the desert. A third theory, even more extreme, argued that the pyramid was never meant for human use, that its proportions echoed ratios found in echolocation systems of deep-sea mammals, leading to the hypothesis that its designers may not have been terrestrial at all. But the data supporting these ideas remains elusive. No official schematics exist. No excavation permits have been granted. And over time, the structure has disappeared from most commercial mapping software. On current satellite feeds, the coordinates return a slightly pixelated desert stretch, blurry, featureless, and wrong. Independent cartographers attempting to reintroduce the pyramid's footprint into open access maps report data corruption, tile rejection, or unexplained checksum failures. It's as if the landscape itself has been rewritten, and the pyramid's presence reduced to rumor. But on some nights, when the wind cuts low and the sand settles, radar scans still bounce irregularly off something octagonal, solid, and waiting. In 2016, a private acoustics research firm based in Austria, Orpheon Technologies, launched an unmanned ground vehicle designed to map sub-resonant frequencies in arid geological zones. The company's contract was tied to non-destructive testing of desert architecture, and the pyramid at Dashur presented a rare opportunity. The vehicle, designated Halo 3, was programmed to emit low-frequency pulses and measure the echo response of buried structures. Within 30 minutes of operation near the base of the pyramid, the sensors detected harmonic returns that exceeded all pre-modeled resonance values. The returning signal formed a stable pattern identical across 3 consecutive passes, suggesting not just a cavity, but an engineered chamber calibrated to respond acoustically. Halo 3's logs recorded a distinct frequency node at 14.8 Hz, hovering just below the average human hearing threshold. The signal persisted for 11 minutes, even after the device ceased transmitting. Then the equipment crashed, logs corrupted, drives wiped. The team retrieved the rover, but its internal firmware had been overwritten with blank code. Backups stored on remote servers had been automatically purged, flagged as malware by third-party systems that had never interacted with the device. Within 2 weeks, Orpheon Technologies received a cease and desist order from Egypt's Ministry of Telecommunications, citing unlicensed signal intrusion and interference with sovereign infrastructure. The firm was fined and their equipment impounded. Attempts to appeal were denied. When international scientific journals attempted to contact the team, none responded. Their website, previously active, was replaced with a static page reading, "Orpheon is no longer in operation." Independent researchers who analyzed the surviving acoustic readings noted that the 14.8 Hz node matched resonant frequencies observed in ancient underground structures found in Malta, eastern Turkey, and the Yucatan Peninsula. This correlation across civilizations, continents, and millennia should have prompted a global study. Instead, it was buried. Several online threads documenting the incident were deleted by moderators, citing violation of national security content guidelines. No such guidelines had ever been previously listed on the hosting platforms. The suppression wasn't just digital. In 2017, an international symposium on ancient architectural acoustics held in Rome removed its keynote session titled "Sonic Signatures in Subterranean Sites," without explanation. The speaker, a researcher affiliated with the University of Vienna, withdrew from all future conferences. Her public research profile was deleted, and the university's press office stated she had left academia for personal reasons. When reached for comment through encrypted channels, she declined to speak, only sharing one statement: "The structure emits more than echoes." That year, a leaked slide deck circulated through private networks, allegedly from a NATO subcommittee on unconventional geotechnical phenomena. Slide 12 featured a labeled diagram of the Dashur Pyramid with a red overlay titled "Category Delta 7 Containment." The context of the label was never explained. The diagram included what appeared to be a schematic for an underground conduit beneath the pyramid, stretching nearly 400 meters into the surrounding bedrock. To date, no such conduit has been publicly acknowledged. No new expeditions have been authorized. On official maps, the site remains unlabeled. But despite efforts to silence inquiry, the pyramid continues to register. Amateur radio operators scanning low-frequency bands occasionally report bursts of infrasound from the region spikes that appear briefly, then vanish. Satellite altimetry scans submitted by hobbyists show a recurring topographic ripple centered exactly at the pyramid's original coordinates, as if the land itself pulses in cycles. No mainstream agency will investigate it. No institution will fund it. But the shape remains. The silence persists. And somewhere beneath stone that no one built and no one is allowed to enter, something is still resonating. In 2017, the International Scanned Pyramids Project announced a discovery that stunned even the most skeptical archaeologists. A massive hidden void above the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, using muon tomography particle detectors capable of revealing density variations. Scientists identified a space at least 30 meters long, untouched since antiquity. Officially dubbed the Big Void, its function remains unknown. It is neither part of the descending nor ascending corridors, does not connect to the king's or queen's chambers, and has no visible access point. Attempts to insert micro-drones or fiber optic cameras through adjacent joints failed when instruments experienced signal loss or returned garbled telemetry. The data was clean, the space was real, but the void refused to reveal its contents. Some dismissed it as an architectural artifact, a structural cavity meant to relieve pressure. But acousticians who modeled the geometry proposed a different hypothesis. The chamber was acoustically resonant tuned to specific harmonic frequencies. And if it resonated, it may have been meant to receive. In an internal white paper circulated among the Scanned Pyramids team, a simulated audio sweep revealed frequency peaks within the chamber that formed a harmonic scale consistent with ancient Sumerian tuning systems, not Egyptian. When external experts were consulted, some noticed a peculiar alignment. The void's dimensions echoed measurements found in Mesopotamian ziggurats, especially the upper sanctum of the Etemenanki, the now destroyed tower, believed to have inspired the biblical story of Babel. The connection raised an uncomfortable question. Were the builders of Giza drawing on knowledge from another source or another culture entirely? Attempts to publish the paper were quietly stonewalled. One reviewer noted, "The data suggests correlation, not causation," and recommended the research be suspended until greater interpretive consensus could be reached. Meanwhile, thermal scans of the pyramid's northeast face showed episodic bursts of heat-short pulses recorded only between 2 and 3 a.m., and only during lunar perigee. The cause of these thermal fluctuations was never identified. All official statements referred to diurnal expansion anomalies, a term not found in standard architectural vocabulary. Further inquiry into the chamber's properties was halted when the Ministry of Antiquities revoked Scanned Pyramids' permit to conduct new measurements. No reason was provided. The team disbanded quietly over the next year. One physicist, speaking under condition of anonymity, revealed that during one scan session in 2018, the detectors registered a sudden spike in cosmic ray deflection, far above expected background radiation. The event lasted only 17 seconds, but was logged on 3 independent instruments. When compared with the void's modeled geometry, the spike aligned perfectly with the center of the chamber. A statistical fluke, perhaps, or an interaction. Other anomalies followed. A drone technician reported hearing a low-frequency hum while near the king's chamber, though no equipment detected sound. The incident was filed as perceptual artifact. A week later, his audio calibration tools stored in a shielded case were magnetized beyond function. No investigation was opened. Researchers began withdrawing. Conferences were canceled. A proposed collaborative effort to laser scan the void using orbital triangulation was denied clearance from both Egyptian and international airspace authorities. The entire project faded from public view. But some evidence remains. Muon density maps, leaked to a private research collective in Switzerland, were run through sound resonance simulation software. The output produced a waveform, a complex tonal structure repeating every 41 seconds. The frequency hovered near 111 Hz, a tone linked in neuroscience to altered states of consciousness. It became known among the group as the note that shouldn't exist. The theory now circulating among fringe analysts is simple but chilling. The Great Pyramid was not just a tomb, not just a monument, but a receiver. A silent chamber, sealed for millennia, waiting for a frequency that no longer exists. Or perhaps one that's returning. Following the leak of the 111 Hz waveform data in 2019, independent acoustics labs across Europe attempted to replicate the signal using architectural models of the Great Pyramid. Most failed to generate anything beyond standard resonance artifacts, but one group operating under the name AuralSpec succeeded. Using a 3D printed, scale-accurate replica of the void's dimensions filled with pressurized nitrogen, the team pulsed a sine wave through the chamber and recorded a harmonic cascade matching the leaked waveform almost perfectly. The frequency stabilized at 111.3 Hz, producing not just a measurable tone, but a pulsing amplitude curve that mirrored alpha wave rhythms in the human brain. Intrigued, the researchers attached EEG sensors to volunteers sitting near the model during activation. Within minutes, subjects reported sensations of dislocation, visual flashes, and in some cases, spontaneous recall of childhood memories they hadn't previously accessed. One subject wept without understanding why. Another spoke in a phonetic pattern that linguists could not match to any known language. The experiment was never published. Within weeks, the AuralSpec facility was shut down, its funding revoked. The model, along with all recorded data, was seized under the pretext of an environmental compliance audit. No charges were filed. The team disbanded and refused interviews. Unconfirmed reports suggest that a private consortium affiliated with aerospace research acquired AuralSpec's surviving hardware. According to internal memos shared on anonymous boards, the group's stated objective was to replicate pyramid channel frequency entrainment for controlled human interface testing. The language echoed phrasing once found in declassified MK Ultra documentation from the 1960s, specifically in projects involving sensory isolation, subliminal stimuli, and brainwave manipulation. Fringe researchers now argue that the chamber's function may have extended beyond ritual or symbolism. If the void can receive or amplify frequencies that synchronize with the human brain, it may have been built to induce altered states, consciously, systematically, and possibly at scale. Some even speculate that initiates within the pyramid's inner chambers may have undergone neurological entrainment using sound alone, their consciousness modulated by architecture. Skeptics dismiss these claims as pseudoscience. But one detail continues to defy dismissal. The chamber is still there, sealed, inaccessible, and surrounded by layers of protection, legal, digital, and bureaucratic. In 2021, an international coalition of architecture students attempted to digitally reconstruct the internal void using public scan pyramids Muon data and open source KD tools. Their renders were posted to GitHub, Reddit, and Sketchfab. Within 48 hours, every link was dead. Repositories returned 404 errors. Accounts were banned. Mirror uploads flagged terms of use violation. The pattern mirrored earlier suppressions. But in a forgotten corner of the darknet, one file remains. A low-res spectrogram of the void's predicted harmonic field, overlaid with annotations in 5 languages. The footer reads simply, "Silence is not absence." Further analysis suggests the void is oriented not randomly, but mathematically angled precisely to celestial coordinates that match the rising of Sirius around 2500 BCE. Sirius, long associated with rebirth and divine transmission in ancient Egyptian lore, was believed to be a gate between worlds. If the void was aligned to receive a signal, then the builders may have been waiting for something, or guarding against it. In either case, it wasn't superstition. It was geometry, timing, frequency, a form of encryption etched into stone. Modern science may not have answers, but it has begun to ask better questions. Why does the void exist in the most measured building on Earth? Why was it hidden? Why does it hum? And why does every attempt to study it disappear? Perhaps the void doesn't need to be opened. Perhaps its purpose was never physical. Perhaps it was built not for the dead, but for the mind. In 2015, a researcher working in data recovery at a Berlin forensics lab encountered a corrupted solid-state drive salvaged from a house fire. The drive was privately submitted, its origin withheld. Initial scans showed no traditional file system, no FAT, no NTFS, no XT4. Instead, the architecture resembled a proprietary binary matrix used in aerospace avionics, something closer to firmware than storage. Within this unindexed structure, the team discovered a single large data block, 4.7 gigabytes of encoded three-dimensional schematics, rendered in a hybrid language that included hexadecimal arrays, vector math, and a cryptographic cipher based loosely on hieroglyphic principles. The file was named HelioGrid v33. At first, the team assumed it was a hoax or art project. But as they began to parse it, the realization set in. The schematics formed a complete architectural layout, massive in scale, structurally alien, but unmistakably rooted in Egyptian design. The floor plan bore resemblance to the Temple of the Sun at Heliopolis. But this version was different, expanded, buried, and built to house something not yet identified. Within weeks, the team contacted academic Egyptologists. None agreed to meet. One responded anonymously, urging them to destroy the data. Heliopolis is a map, the message read. Not of the land, of the signal. The phrase made no sense until linguists began to isolate patterns in the file's data arrays. Using machine learning models trained on ancient Egyptian phonetics and modern algorithmic language inference, the file revealed a second layer. Not architectural, but liturgical. Buried beneath every structural node was a sequence of phonemes. Recitations, chants, incantations coded into the spatial dimensions of the digital temple. When rendered through acoustic simulation, the building emitted harmonics. These harmonics correlated with celestial cycles, particularly the precession of Sirius and Orion's belt. Heliopolis, long believed to be a religious center, was revealed by the model as something far more precise, a harmonic machine. A repository of encoded knowledge tied to resonance, memory, and time. No one knows where the original data came from. The client who submitted the drive vanished. Attempts to trace the file's origin yielded only partial IP logs, routing through masked servers in Romania, Taiwan, and an unknown protocol signature originating near Luxor. More curiously, parts of the file's metadata included date stamps written in ISO 8601 format, but with years numbered in 5 digits, suggesting a non-standard epoch. One time code translated to year 10176. Whether this was an error or an embedded cipher remains unknown. But after 2 months of research, the lab was raided. Local authorities cited illegal possession of state-classified cryptographic software, an accusation that made no sense. The staff were detained, the drive was seized, and no public charges were ever filed. One technician fled the country, releasing a portion of the schematic in fragmented PNG form to a darknet archive. The image shows a floor pattern of intersecting concentric rings, each labeled in both Egyptian cursive and machine code. The center is marked with a single glyph unknown in Egyptology, but identical to a symbol carved into the wall of the Osirion at Abydos. A circle split by 3 vertical strokes, believed by some to represent resonance convergence. The surviving fragment is now referred to as the digital scroll. Scholars who've seen it describe it not as a temple blueprint, but as an operating system. A ritual encoded into architecture. A program designed not to run on silicon, but on stone. And if the file is real, if HelioGrid v33 is not a hoax, it may represent the first known instance of what some are calling archaic code, an ancient syntax designed to survive extinction, chaos, or reset. Not to be read, but to be rebuilt. Months after the HelioGrid v33 schematic was partially leaked, cybersecurity researchers monitoring anomaly patterns within cloud storage systems noticed a strange behavior. Files containing fragments of the digital scroll began to trigger automated shutdowns across multiple hosting platforms. These weren't standard copyright violations or malware flags. Instead, the storage servers responded as if the files contained known exploit signatures, ones that hadn't been publicly documented. Even encrypted zip archives containing the files would vanish mid-transfer, sometimes without triggering logs. One analyst at a Scandinavian data firm noted that file hashes from HelioGrid v33 matched a sequence previously logged in an NSA fingerprint registry in 2009 under the codename Osiris Core. The project, thought to be defunct, was rumored to involve deep learning applied to non-Euclidean symbolic systems. The discovery implied that some version of the digital scroll had been seen before, possibly intercepted, cataloged, and quietly blacklisted. It was no longer just archaeology. It was code with a classification level. Further analysis of the schematic's embedded chant strings revealed something else. When the phoneme patterns were translated into MIDI data and run through neural net composition models, the resulting harmonies mirrored EEG activity captured during dream state studies conducted by DARPA in the early 2000s. Specifically, the melody triggered synchronized alpha-theta crossover waves, the same pattern associated with lucid dreaming, memory integration, and in extreme cases, hypnotic suggestibility. In lay terms, the sound created by the building's internal ritual code appeared capable of shaping brain activity. Whether this effect was intentional, emergent, or coincidental remains unknown. But the implications were immediate. If the Library of Heliopolis wasn't just an archive, but a machine designed to interface with human cognition, then it represents a technological threshold beyond anything in known antiquity. A fusion of space, sound, and signal built not for worship, but for synchronization. Attempts to study the digital scroll further were abruptly halted. 3 separate academic papers, scheduled for publication in journals focused on digital archaeology, ancient linguistics, and AI-augmented reconstruction, were pulled preemptively. In each case, the authors received cease and desist notices from legal entities they could not identify. One email originated from an untraceable domain that resolved to a server block registered to a former British military contractor. Another included a PDF warning that further disclosure may constitute a breach of sovereignty under cooperative defense provisions. The language was vague but deliberate. Files disappeared from preprint servers. Git repositories were rolled back. A graduate student in Madrid who attempted to recreate the chant strings using open-source synthesis tools reported that his system audio interface blew out mid-playback. His headphones, disconnected from any power source, buzzed for 10 minutes afterward. Despite efforts to suppress it, the scroll continues to circulate, fractured, mirrored, and reassembled in underground networks. A 2023 presentation at an unlisted Zurich symposium proposed that HelioGrid v33 might be a surviving component of a much larger operating system, fragmented across multiple sites, possibly in multiple formats: stone, fiber, sound, and even biological data. The presenter claimed the scroll bore hallmarks of what he called non-human symbolic compression, a system so efficient it could store context, not just content. a memory kernel, a seed. And if this is true, then Heliopolis was never meant to be a city. It was meant to be a library, not for the people of its time, but for whatever might come after. Something that could read across frequencies, feel across centuries, and rebuild from ruin. Something that, if activated, wouldn't open a tomb or summon a god, but boot up. In 2003, during the excavation of a secondary burial chamber near El Koka, west of Luxor, a team of Egyptian archaeologists recorded what appeared to be an anomalous cartouche carved into the back wall of a tomb designated TT-307. The tomb was unremarkable modest in size, with basic funerary inscriptions dating to the late 18th dynasty. But the cartouche stood out. It contained a name not listed in any royal lineage, a sequence of glyphs denoting Sehejet Aken, which loosely translates to "he who sees the ending." The figure was not referenced anywhere else in Egyptian records. No statue, no stele, no temple. Just this single name cut into the wall of a tomb, too small for a noble, too plain for royalty. A doctoral student on the site took several high-resolution photographs. But when the excavation was reviewed 2 months later, the cartouche was gone. Chiseled off, sanded flat. The restoration team claimed erosion. The photos were dismissed as artifacting. But the student, skeptical of the official explanation, uploaded one image to a private FTP server hosted at his university. Within 48 hours, the account was deleted. A backup of the photo surfaced a year later on a French academic mailing list. Image analysts confirmed the cartouche was authentic. The weathering matched the surrounding wall. The light angles were consistent. There was no evidence of digital manipulation. The glyphs were real. And then the questions began. Why would a single tomb contain the name of an undocumented pharaoh? And why would that name be removed so quickly and so thoroughly? Linguists noted the grammar was unusual. The name didn't follow typical titulary patterns. It was structured more like a warning or a designation. Some suggested it may have been an epithet applied posthumously. Others thought it was not a name at all, but a role perhaps ceremonial, perhaps functional. He who sees the ending evoked eschatological themes not common in traditional Egyptian theology. It sounded less like a king and more like a sentinel. In 2006, a researcher at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute attempted to correlate the cartouche with references found in the controversial Thule Papyrus, a disputed document describing flying discs in the sky during the reign of Thutmose III. The researcher proposed that Sehejet Aken might have been a suppressed dynastic figure associated with cosmic phenomena, possibly during a politically volatile transition. The paper was accepted for peer review, but retracted before publication. The author, Dr. Elise Morrow, resigned from her post later that year. In her final blog post, now deleted, she wrote, "Some stories don't vanish. They are erased. There's a difference." Her office was cleared by university staff. Her colleagues refused comment. No further reference to the cartouche appeared in academic circles. Meanwhile, independent expeditions attempting to locate the tomb found themselves blocked. TT-307 was reclassified as part of a conservation buffer zone with no entry permitted. Coordinates for the chamber were delisted from public records. Satellite imagery of the location began showing terrain anomalies, pixelated misalignments that mirrored errors seen at military installations. Even mapping drones refused to fly directly over the site, citing magnetic interference. Only one attempt to revisit the chamber was documented, conducted in 2012 by a German filmmaker working under a tourism license. His footage, never released, was confiscated upon departure. According to a customs incident report, his equipment emitted non-ionizing radiation spikes that triggered airport sensors. The devices were destroyed. He was detained for 48 hours and deported. But the cartouche remains documented in a single surviving frame, etched in a language we thought we understood. Not a myth, not a forgery. A name that shouldn't be there, tied to a figure that doesn't exist. And yet, it was removed with urgency, as if someone remembered him, or feared he might return. Shortly after the rediscovery of the cartouche photo in 2004, a linguistics graduate student at the University of Leiden attempted to recreate the phonetic rendering of Sehejet Aken using reconstructed Old Egyptian vocalization rules. She synthesized the name into a voice model for a project exploring ancient oral recitation. When played aloud in an acoustic chamber, the output generated a low-frequency harmonic distortion not in the speakers, but in the room itself. Microphones captured a resonance effect inconsistent with the software's signal. Further tests revealed the phenomenon only occurred when the syllables were spoken in sequence. Separated or reordered, the effect disappeared. Disturbed but curious, the student presented her findings at a departmental colloquium. That night, the lab's audio server crashed and its backup archive failed checksum validation. No other projects were affected. The chair of the department later issued a memo discouraging further unauthorized reconstructions of proto-religious phoneme clusters. The phrase was not standard academic language. The student left the program months later. Other attempts to track the name across digital archives met equally strange resistance. A metadata query conducted by researchers in Prague for the term Sehejet returned thousands of irrelevant results, many mislabeled or linked to corrupted files. More alarmingly, a cross-reference with scanned papyri revealed a pattern of partial erasures glyph clusters containing similar phonetic roots, scratched out, blurred, or replaced in reprints, often without explanation. In some cases, the damage predated modern digitization. The implication: this wasn't an isolated anomaly, but a sustained removal campaign. Not deletion, suppression. One file, from a late Ptolemaic funerary roll held in storage at the Vatican Library, showed signs of physical scraping around a name structure identical to the Sehejet Cartouche 4 vertical strokes, an inverted crown, and a star between two arms. The manuscript was marked unfit for display. No scans have been released. In 2011, a London-based computational epigraphy lab ran a machine learning project to identify structural outliers in ancient Egyptian glyphs, essentially errors, experiments, or anomalies in symbolic patterns. Trained on over 90,000 cataloged inscriptions, the system flagged 38 instances of what it called Type 17 anomalies. All 38 shared one trait: a cartouche-like enclosure containing a glyph not indexed in any Egyptological record. The glyph, described as a diamond intersected by a horizontal line, appeared to have been carved and then deliberately overwritten or damaged. These anomalies spanned multiple dynasties and regions, and yet every occurrence was listed as a recording error or undeciphered mark. The dataset was published briefly on GitHub before being removed without explanation. One archived copy still exists on a mirrored server. Its final line reads, "The mark is not an error, it's a key." By 2020, discussions about Sehejet Aken had all but vanished. Forums once filled with speculation went silent. Mentions of the name on social media accounts were algorithmically buried or mislabeled as sensitive misinformation. An independent film exploring the cartouche's mystery failed crowdfunding after backers received notices that their pledges violated platform policy. No policy was cited. The few who persist now do so in encrypted channels and decentralized nodes. They refer to Akhenaten not as a person, but a function, a title, a gatekeeper. And some believe the name wasn't meant to be spoken. It was meant to be remembered silently, transmitted like a resonance through stone and time. If true, then the cartouche wasn't an error. It was a lock. And someone decided the world wasn't ready to open it. In 2021, a collaborative study between astrophysicists and architectural historians proposed an unconventional theory that several ancient Egyptian burial sites, including lesser-known tombs in Abu Sir and Abu Rawash, were not just aligned to stars, but calibrated to open under specific cosmic conditions. This idea, dubbed the time lock hypothesis, originated from the observation that certain sealed chambers across Egypt exhibited stress fractures only during narrow celestial events such as lunar perigee or solar equinoxes. These fractures weren't structural failures, they were consistent, cyclic, and oddly reversible. One tomb in Saqqara was recorded emitting an audible pressure release sound every 18.6 years, coinciding exactly with the lunar nodal cycle. Engineers initially dismissed the phenomenon as tectonic movement. But vibration analysis showed harmonics resonating in geometrically tuned corridors, hallways that behaved like mechanical timers, storing and discharging energy based on cosmic rhythms. It wasn't architecture, it was activation. The study identified at least 6 tombs that appeared to follow this pattern. Each contained a shaft or chamber oriented not just to stars, but to variable celestial events. The wobble of Earth's axis, the shifting of planetary tilt, the oscillation of gravitational tides. When simulations were run using precession models, researchers found that the tomb's stress response patterns aligned with future dates, not random, but clustered. One date stood out repeatedly, July 26, 2025. On that day, a convergence of solar, lunar, and magnetic anomalies would occur, an intersection not seen for over 4,000 years. The data implied that these tombs weren't just sealed to protect the dead, but to synchronize with the sky. The builders weren't burying something to preserve it. They were timing its return. Skeptics argued coincidence, but the physical evidence continued to accumulate. In 2019, a Swiss engineering group performing non-invasive scans on a closed tomb near Aswan detected a sudden drop in subsurface resistance, a cavity becoming temporarily less dense. The reading lasted precisely 88 minutes, beginning at the same moment a solar flare struck Earth's upper atmosphere. No power failure occurred. The data was confirmed by 3 separate sensors. Attempts to scan again failed. The equipment began producing static and fractal patterns, visually resembling hieroglyphic clusters. The symbols, when transcribed, loosely formed phrases like passage open and cycle returned. Linguists dismissed this as pareidolia, but signal analysts suggested otherwise, calling it structured noise. Similar patterns had been recorded at 2 other sites during solar events, one in Nubia, the other in the Western Desert. All 3 sites had been inaccessible for decades. What's more, several tombs identified under the hypothesis had previously resisted conventional excavation. Mechanical drills failed. LiDAR mapping returned false positives. Stone that was once impenetrable now showed signs of softening measured not by erosion, but by minute shifts in density, as if the material itself was chemically different. One theory proposes that the ancient Egyptians used compounds in the stone that responded to electromagnetic frequencies, perhaps natural, perhaps induced. The tombs weren't locked by force. They were waiting for a signal, a kind of architectural encryption keyed not to a code, but to time itself. And that time may be now. July 2025 is approaching. The alignments are converging. And if the hypothesis is even partially correct, we may soon witness tombs opening themselves because something in their design was always meant to count down. Following the publication of the time lock hypothesis, a pattern of institutional shifts began to emerge. The Egyptian government, citing infrastructure modernization, closed access to 4 minor tomb complexes in early 2022, each linked to the predicted 2025 alignment. In parallel, global positioning databases were quietly updated. Minor tomb sites were renamed, recoded, or folded into generic entries like Archaeological mound, erasing decades of cataloged data. Satellite archives, once open to the academic public, were rerouted behind credentialed paywalls, limiting access to high-resolution imagery of desert regions around Giza, Dashur, and Abydos. Simultaneously, new contracts were issued to aerospace firms under Earth observation initiatives. But the tasking orders weren't for agriculture or climate tracking. They were orbital passes centered on tomb coordinates, nighttime thermal imaging, spectral analysis, ionospheric disturbance monitoring. On paper, none of it referenced archaeology. But in every case, the requested window aligned with solar or lunar events. The tombs weren't being studied, they were being watched. In early 2023, seismic sensor arrays were deployed in concentric grids surrounding Giza and Saqqara. Officially part of an earthquake early warning system, the sensors were curiously limited in depth, ignoring fault lines and subcrustal patterns. Instead, they were optimized for detecting low-frequency surface resonance vibrations beneath 1 Hz, the kind produced by gradual shifts in solid structures. These arrays were connected to a central monitoring facility established in Cairo's Tech Corridor, reportedly staffed by a multi-agency team with ties to both academic and military sectors. When questioned about the deployment, a spokesperson claimed it was precautionary cultural asset protection. Yet leaked procurement documents revealed purchases of magnetic field monitors, geoelectric probes, and wide-spectrum RF sniffers tools used not for protection, but for detection. Detection of what remained unstated. But the implication was clear. Something was being tracked beneath the sand. Whistleblowers from institutions involved in the sensor program began to surface on encrypted channels. One shared internal memos referencing activation zones and resonant markers. Another provided a map with heat index predictions overlaid with the 2025 astronomical convergence. The markers clustered in 3 areas: an unexcavated platform in southern Dashur, the unopened chamber beneath the Sphinx, and a tomb wall near El Coca's site of the erased cartouche. The convergence wasn't theoretical anymore. It was operational. What's more, several ancient texts, once dismissed as metaphor, began to attract renewed interest. Inscriptions describing doors that bloom beneath the rising star, stones that pulse in lunar shadow, and vaults whose locks are time itself, were reevaluated not as mythology, but as encrypted architecture. Some now believe these phrases weren't poetic, they were technical. Embedded instructions for an opening protocol, tied not to key or tool, but to alignment. Amid these shifts, one constant remained: silence. Academic journals refused to publish articles referencing the time lock hypothesis. Research into cosmic engineering was relabeled narrative speculation. Online encyclopedias edited entries to remove language about stellar calibration in pyramid design. And behind the scenes, meetings took place. Closed sessions between defense agencies, data infrastructure firms, and cultural ministries. Their topic was always the same. If a tomb opens, who owns what emerges? What laws apply to a chamber that opens itself? What jurisdiction governs a signal released by architecture built before the law itself? The answers were not legal. They were logistical. Satellite bandwidth was reserved. Drone fleets were repositioned. Non-disclosure protocols were pre-signed by excavation crews. Because if the alignment holds and the locks release, what we uncover will not simply rewrite history. It will rewrite timing. It will mark the moment when the past stops being memory and becomes instruction. For centuries, Egyptology has asked, who was buried here? But as patterns emerge, secrets sealed, names erased, coordinates rewritten, the question evolves into something far more unsettling. Who was hidden here? And not just hidden from tomb robbers or rival dynasties, but from time itself. Throughout the valley networks, a silent ledger begins to reveal itself, unrecorded tombs that show signs of deliberate construction but no documentation. Heat maps from orbital thermography reveal dozens of buried chambers in known archaeological zones. Yet none have permits filed, none appear in excavation records, and none are acknowledged in public databases. These aren't random anomalies, they're omissions. Deliberate blank spaces across a cultural canvas that otherwise itemizes even the most trivial fragment. Someone has been editing the story, and they've been doing it for a long time. In 2020, a data set leaked from an unnamed geological consortium showed a buried structure west of Kom Omboa, rectangular enclosure roughly the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools, lying just 4 meters beneath the surface. The structure bore internal crossbeams, corner buttresses, and a central cavity lined with what ground-penetrating radar indicated were concentric arcs, possibly vaults, possibly reinforcement rings. The formation matched no known architectural style in the region. Within a week of the leak, a new construction project was announced for the exact coordinates. A solar energy facility, complete with gravel trenching, excavation teams, and military oversight. The original radar team was told they had made a data indexing error. All field equipment was confiscated. And yet the archive still contains one labeled scan, cataloged under the header, Mat Null. It remains encrypted, but metadata reveals the compression tool used, a proprietary format developed for satellite telemetry encryption, not academic fieldwork. Someone else was watching, someone with tools archaeologists don't use. Meanwhile, private excavation attempts have encountered invisible fences. A British team in 2017 exploring a satellite-flagged site near the Siwa Oasis lost drone control 5 minutes into descent. Their aircraft plummeted after the GPS signal reversed, reporting its altitude as negative, its direction as stationary, and its location as 400 kilometers into the Mediterranean Sea. The drone's internal log was unrecoverable. The site, now fenced off by local authorities, is labeled a soil stability hazard. No geological assessment has been published, and across forums, more stories appear. Excavation tools disabling themselves, magnetometers flipping their polarity mid-sweep, documents pulled from academic servers, whistleblowers quietly vanishing from the conversation. The burials are still there. But so are the locks, not just of stone, but of protocol. Obfuscation has become a method, erasure a form of preservation. And yet one truth keeps leaking through. The names missing from the scrolls, the cartouches wiped clean, the tombs built with no bodies. They point to a presence deliberately unrecorded. A figure or a lineage, so central that their absence had to be written in silence. Some fringe theorists call it a bloodline of origin. Others believe it was a class of caretakers, not gods, not kings, but intermediaries, technicians of the sacred. Whatever they were buried in places that remain sealed, protected by conditions that modern science is only beginning to measure. And the systems guarding them are not passive. They correct. They override. They delete. The real question may not be what they buried, but what they feared we might do with it. Because buried deep beneath Egypt's carefully curated history, beneath the myths and monuments, is a signal. not a beacon, not a message, a firewall. And if the tomb's open, we may find that we haven't rediscovered the past at all. We've tripped the failsafe. In 2022, a classified briefing circulated among a coalition of heritage protection agencies in Europe warned of non-conforming emergence potential tied to geospatial hotspots in northern Egypt. Though worded like risk management boilerplate, the phrasing was unique. Emergence potential suggested the anticipation of exposure, something beneath the surface not yet visible but expected. The attached coordinates included several sites previously discussed only in fringe communities. The Dashur Pyramid with no entrance, the resonance chamber in Giza, the unexcavated vault near Kom Ombo. The briefing advised local governments to restrict aerial surveys, reinforce perimeter fencing, and synchronize public narratives in case of unexpected media coverage. But perhaps most chilling was a single phrase underlined in red at the bottom of the document. Do not treat as discovery. Treat as breach. This wasn't just about controlling history. It was about containment. And whatever was sealed beneath the desert floor, someone believed it was sealed for a reason. The implications stretch beyond archaeology. Artificial intelligence models trained on unrestricted historical texts have begun identifying missing semantic nodes, gaps in dynastic patterns, linguistic sequences that should exist but don't. It's as if history itself has been redacted at the structural level. One AI, developed independently in South Korea, generated a predictive lineage chart of pre-dynastic Egypt using only environmental data and trade patterns. The model produced a name at the top of the chart, Nahentuaken, a name found nowhere in recorded history, but disturbingly close in syntax to the erased cartouche of Sehed-Jet Aken. When prompted to explain, the model cited ancestral convergence probability. In other words, the data thinks someone is missing, someone foundational, someone removed not just from texts, but from memory, architecture, and timekeeping systems themselves. The model later flagged Tomb Cave 31, still unopened, as a statistical memory node. It offered no further explanation. The project was discontinued 2 months later. As 2025 approaches and the predicted convergence aligns, certain behaviors grow harder to ignore. Drone restrictions tighten, excavation permits freeze, satellite altimetry returns null values over known sites. And in isolated corners of the academic world, researchers whisper about things they can't publish, about dreams shared by field teams miles apart, about standing inside sealed tombs and feeling pressure where none exists, about radios picking up sounds that aren't voices, but patterns, rhythms, recitations, something ancient, not in age, but in recurrence, like a system waiting to be reactivated, not remembered. Perhaps that's the real story of Egypt, not a civilization obsessed with death, but a culture engineered to manage cycles, to encode resets, and to bury not their dead, but their triggers. Mechanisms designed to sleep until conditions align again. And perhaps the pharaohs weren't builders, but stewards, not kings of stone, but jailers of something beneath it. Because in the end, the signs don't point to an origin. They point to a suppression. Something was buried here, not to preserve it, but to stop it. A lineage was removed, not out of vengeance, but necessity. Chambers were tuned, tombs locked, frequencies gated, and memories rewritten. And as our tools grow more precise, our scanners sharper, our models deeper, we're not uncovering truth. We're breaking seals, tomb by tomb, bit by bit. And we don't know what happens if they all open. What if this wasn't a mystery to solve, but a warning to ignore?